Growth Pod is brought to you by Genero, a leading growth agency in the Nordics. We interview marketing experts, business leaders, and entrepreneurs to uncover the stories and strategies behind profitable growth.
Today's guest is Björn Thorngren, the founder and CEO of Meds, which is an online pharmacy in Sweden. On the Financial Times list of Europe's fastest growing companies between 2018 and 2021, Meds was ranked number 1 in Sweden and number 72nd in Europe. Welcome to the show, Björn.
Thank you very much, and great to be here.
So you had a background in business development, M&A, and investment, and I'd be curious to, given that background, you presumably have a really good understanding of markets, breaking apart business models, and so I'd be curious to know what was kind of like the insight that you saw that led you to found Meds back in, I think, 2017 or 2018?
Correct. Yeah, we launched in 2018, but we started in 2017. So I really do have a 360-degree career, kind of a backwards career. I started with tech investments and then moving on to advisory and then operational roles for a US company, and then finally founding Meds at quite a late stage in life. I'm happy to have read in Harvard Business Review that the most successful startups are started by 45-year-olds. So at least that we did right. And of course, I've still a lot to learn, as does everyone. But the experience from those various sides of business was valuable in finding what to do and what to start. And number one is a big market, and obviously pharmacy is one of the largest retail markets around. It's in Sweden, over 5 billion euros per year, and it keeps growing. It's been growing since the Middle Ages and grows every year, totally uncyclical. So that was number two, and not being impacted by economic shifts was really good. And then finally, I was really looking for a consumer-oriented service, as I've been very much into the B2B space before, which is also great, but a lot more binary. Either you land that big customer or you don't. And if you do not, then you're in trouble. Whereas, of course, we like to keep 100% customers happy. But if we lose one, we can always find another. And it's a lot more movement. It generates money while we're sleeping. So that combined with a real problem to solve, I think made all the bits there to build a great company.
And you mentioned that there are some unique features of the online pharmacy, or like pharmacy in general, in Sweden. I think we talked about it had something in common with North Korea, the Swedish pharmacy.
Yes, the Swedish market is extreme, and it's funny. There's a Swedish expression, lagom, which means just about right. But really, nothing in Sweden is lagom. We're always on the either one side or the other. And with pharmacy, in 1971, all pharmacies were nationalized, and there was only one pharmacy, a big chain called The Pharmacy, and that remained until 2010. So Sweden was unique with North Korea in having a government monopoly for pharmacy, and we're actually still unique in that this chain remains, and only North Korea and Sweden does have a state-run pharmacy retail chain, even though the market is deregulated, and that chain is not even number one and has no special mission. So it's interesting to compete against the government that also in many ways sets the terms for our business. So they're on both sides. And there was an advantage of that background in that one government entity talked to another government entity, and thereby we have really good technology to sell online. We have 100% electronic prescriptions, and we also have a digital ID, and we have good regulation that actually allows this, which is not the case in many other countries. So Sweden is the leading country globally in terms of selling prescribed medicine online. So even though we're a very small country, small population, we have a huge market, and we also have the very best prerequisites to create a business. So that's why we're still only here and not having expanded to many other markets, which is the norm for a scale up, and actually has been what I've done for other companies in the past, just expanding to new markets all around.
Yeah, I don't think that's obvious to people, but you mentioned that the online penetration in the pharmacy industry is like 10 times higher in Sweden than it is in Norway, for instance. So there's a huge difference in terms of just consumer behavior.
Very much so, and that also is because the government pharmacy actually launched online back in 2006. So they were early in promoting the concept, which means it's known. And in many other countries, it's still quite unknown. And when I talk to peers in other countries, they say we have to spend a lot of time and effort in educating people that this is even possible. And that's not really the case here. And it's not controversial in some markets. It's seen as a threat by the existing physical pharmacies, and they lobby against it. Whereas here, everyone's doing it, and even the government's doing it. So it's not controversial at all, and everyone see the value it brings, because we have very few pharmacies in Sweden. We have half the EU average, which is also a result of the monopoly. They only placed pharmacies here, there, on like a strategic level rather than actual according to demand. So we do feel a very important gap in bridging that here.
So let's talk a little bit about like the early days of meds. It sounds like you had a very good kind of the macro view made a lot of sense, right? There are good prerequisite for starting a business in this non-cyclical, ever-growing market, and Sweden is the right country to do that. But presumably you guys had competitors, including the government, which is I can imagine difficult competitor to have. So what was the strategy in the beginning in what I would assume to be a very price-driven market? What was the strategy in terms of customer acquisition and differentiation for you guys?
Yeah, that has actually been one of our greatest challenges, and we sat a lot with different marketing agencies, and they tried to really find what's the unique selling point, and we were quite blunt with that. There isn't one, and just accept it. It's a huge market. Everyone sells the same products, especially when it comes to prescribed medicine. We don't even control the inventory. It's decided by the doctors. So what we do is we create a really good experience every time, and that's unique selling point. If you are happy as a customer, you will return. So we do our best to really live up to what we promised and try to fix when things go wrong. But that said, we do also compete with a higher service level. So we have customer service 7 days a week, and we deliver faster than others. And we have our warehouse just outside the city of Stockholm, whereas others are hours away. And 50% of the market is in this region, so we can deliver faster. And then we work a lot also with the customer experience, making it as fast and smooth as possible. And of course, we do try also to stick out in terms of what products we sell. But 90% plus is the same everywhere. And so then I guess the only way you can really stick out is to be the by far cheapest. And that's a position we haven't chosen. I worked a lot in telecoms before, and I see in most markets there are 3 or 4 mobile operators, and it's similar dynamics actually. They do tend to take a position of the market. One is the former government incumbent, and one is sort of enterprise, and one is the consumer, and then there's typically a value player, and that's us. We deliver a lot of value. We have good prices, but we're not always number one. But we're already a lot more affordable than the stores. There's a huge price difference between stores and online, which doesn't exist in any other market. So it's quite unique for pharmacy, at least in Sweden. So there is a great advantage to shopping here, and then maybe you can get 1 or 2% even cheaper if you hunt around for each and every product, and that's fine. We don't have to take 100% of the market.
I think I could just imagine the marketing agencies kind of getting heads exploding when they're trying to figure out the differentiation. And
yeah, it was almost like an interrogation. Like, tell me the USP. Like, we don't have it.
But it sounds like you had a really clear strategy and kind of like a playbook out of the Amazon, way of approaching customer obsession. And essentially you said it doesn't matter if the price is still going to be so much cheaper to shop online versus in store, that a large percent of customers are not going to try to find exactly the cheapest, like pain killers, whatever. They're going to go for the meds, which is because of they know they get the best customer service. So
that's really what we're aiming for, and that they can find also everything they're looking for. I think that's equally important, that it's not a theoretical product inventory. We have 20,000 plus products, 30,000 plus if you include the prescribed medicine. But if only a handful of those are actually in store and then you have to wait, then you go somewhere else. So we work a lot with actually getting things in and making sure they're never out of stock and always available. That's probably, especially when it comes to our products that you typically need in a hurry, more important than if you can save 10 cents.
That makes sense. So in addition to obvious things like inventory, what have you guys been doing? What kind of investments have you been making in customer experience to make sure that you are, the customers are really happy every single time and they keep coming back? Because obviously it sounds like a really effective strategy, growth strategy, but I would guess it's not very simple to execute. So what have you guys kind of been doing, and how have you gone about finding customer needs and meeting them, and perhaps before your competitors have been able to?
Yeah, it is a challenge, especially when the company grows as fast as we have done. So 170% on average during a couple of years. And we could have grown actually a lot faster, but then we would have also taken in a lot of unhappy customers. And that's not very smart, because they don't come back. So you just spend a lot of money on acquisition and then they go somewhere else and are disappointed. So investing ahead of time has been very important to us in all aspects, in terms of capacity in the warehouse, in a number of pharmacies, number of customer service staff, and IT. That you hear a lot, I think, especially in the D2C space, the brands, when they launch something, the website breaks down, and then they're happy because the demand was so great. For us, that's not what we're looking for. We need the website to always work, and we do invest a lot. We develop all IT systems in-house. My co-founder, Adam Shawaf, is the CTO, and we do take a lot of pride in making sure it works. It's boring, but it's very, very important.
Just on a quick side note, because it's kind of so fresh, are you using AI in any ways already to improve the customer experience in any way? Anything that you're kind of excited about? Any use cases in general for AI that you're looking at?
We have some built in, but we can do a lot more, and that's often we talk a lot about internally. How do we get all this promise to actually get traction in the business? Because there's always an excuse why you don't use it. It's not good enough yet for my particular task. And of course, if you're a really good designer, then AI will not do exactly what you want all the time. And vice versa, if you're a content writer or you're a buyer or whatever. But we have to find a level where it's good enough and actually start using it, and accept that sometimes it will not go great, and then we fix it. But we have only touched on the surface there, and I think also some may, in general, not just here, in general, be concerned. What happens to my job with AI? Will it take my job? But our philosophy is that it might, if you don't embrace AI, because then we'll have to hire someone that knows AI. But if you do it, then you're going to be irreplaceable. Plus, you're going to be supercharged. You're going to be able to do 10 times as much in the same time without being stressed. So that's how we have to see this. And there's so much we can do in the customer experience. Our board member, David, who's CMO Klarna, he has a lot of experience from China, for example, where he says, you don't search for the product searches for you. And with the breadth of products we have, and it's hard for a consumer to find out what is actually right for me. And even for me, I've been in the company now 5+ years, and when I walk around in a warehouse, I find a lot of products that I didn't know existed. So how can we help the consumer find those products online? In every way, in the customer service, there's good enough solutions for pretty much everything now. So it's no longer a theoretic concept; it's out there. So the answer is we're just started, but a year from now, I think you hopefully will see a lot of changes in how we approach the customers and how we help our suppliers as well. So it goes the whole way.
Yeah, I think I can imagine that there must be such a huge opportunity in helping customers discover more products that they can use, because I don't know, there must be millions out there. Going back to customers and customer acquisition, you have about something around 800,000 active customers right now, and you're, like you said, you're only in Sweden. So quick math, that should be around 8% of the total population, which is pretty crazy for a new company. Can you talk a little bit about the acquisition strategies that you have used to acquire those customers, and maybe if those are changing, and if so, how, as you kind of continue to increase, to scale the company?
Yeah, it's mind-boggling actually that it's that many, and of course it's because we're an industry that touches everyone. So if you just look at the prescribed medicine, 2/3 of the population have at least one prescription per year, and for women that's even higher. It's like 80%, and then we sell a lot more as well. So some people say, "Oh, I don't go to a pharmacy," but like, do you brush your teeth? Do you wash your hair? Yeah, of course you do. Do you need some skincare? Yeah, I do. Do you eat some vitamins? Yeah, I do. So yeah, you do shop at pharmacies. Typically, it's the women of the household that do the shopping, and the band-aids just magically appear at home. So I think that's a key question to figure out who's actually making the buying decision. And so if you look at our audience, it's heavily tilted to females, 70-80%, and quite young. It's like 25 to 55 is the core, even though we have customers that are over 100. But in general, everyone's our customers. So we have to figure out who's most likely to switch, because it's still an early adopter game, and who's most profitable as well. So we just don't find the bargain hunters. So our strategy has been from the start to build a brand. 5 out of 10 Swedes now recognize meds, which is even more mind-boggling, I guess. And we invested a lot in brand campaigns in the early days. We retained Måns Zelmerlöw, the Eurovision Song Contest winner, and he did a music video which was really recognized because he was actually naked on a horse. So that made headlines, especially since it was a pharmacy that did it. Pharmacies are typically very generic, green and boring, and all of a sudden we had this pop star on a horse without clothes. So we decided to stick out because we are very serious in everything we do in the operations, and that I think means we don't have to be serious in every part of the way in how we communicate. So that was important in the first few years, getting the brand out there, getting it well known, and understood that this is a serious player. This is one of a few. There's actually not that many big pharmacy players, but they're strong. So we compete with the government. We compete with the ICA, which is the largest grocery chain here, extremely well-known brands. So we have to build our brand as well. And having done that, we gradually toned that down, and now it's all about getting as many to actually test the service. It's not good enough to just know about meds. We want you to test it and hopefully be happy and come back. So that's a process I think that will continue for some time, and eventually we can then start growing the brand investments again and just reinforcing what you already know. You had a good experience, don't forget it, basically. So that's the tactic in short. But of course, we try to maximize that we're online, that we know so much about our customers, and figure out which are our most profitable customers and how can we keep those customers and attract more of those customers, and not the ones that we don't see really benefit us, because it's a tight margin industry and we cannot serve everyone every time.
That's really interesting. Like it sounds like you made brand investments quite early on, which is, I think, for most kind of startup scale-ups, the opposite is they first focus really heavily on tactical, like performance marketing, getting users, customers, whatever. And then at the end or later on, they start adding brand investments. But it sounds like doing brand early on was really key in order for you guys to explain or show to people that this is something new and different.
Yeah, I think it depends on what industry you're in. So if you're in an industry that's very new and you're actually building the market as you're scaling up your service or product, then it doesn't really make sense to just invest in a brand, because what is that? That's nothing. But we're entering a huge, very old incumbent industry, and we need to really box our way in. So that's what we decided we have to make this investment. But in general, I think it's smarter to really make sure you have a solid product and product market fit, and then start investing. That's a more traditional approach for sure.
And you mentioned that you guys are now very heavily focusing on getting the right customers because the margins are so tight. Can you talk about, maybe, are there any practical ways of first like identifying that and then actually trying to go after those specific type of customers? I feel like that's something a lot of companies struggle with, is even if they know that there's a specific segment that they should be targeting, they just, is it about channels or is it about messaging, or are there other tactics that you can use to find those specific address or reach that specific segment that you want?
Yeah, it's all about making sure what part of the data set you analyze, because we have so much data, you can easily get lost, I think. But if we look at, we need high average order values. That's the key. Like, it doesn't matter if you have 100% margins on a low average order value in e-com, it's not going to work. So we need to find the people that spend a lot, and preferably the ones that also spend in the categories that have higher margins. And after a while, you learn that, it's probably, it's not so much tied to geography, but it's rather age, gender, and other things that define if you are a customer that really adds value to us, that are loyal and don't always shop around for each and every campaign. We can still give campaigns and to activate the customer base, and that's really what we're looking probably the most at now is improving our CRM game. We made a key recruits in that area, and having people shop more often of what we know are loyal and profitable customers. So on average, you should shop 4 times a year in this industry, and our customers still, on average, shop less than that. But if we can focus on the customers that have shopped at least twice, then we see they do tend to stay a long time, and they have shown a lot of potential of increasing, and thereby each time they increase average order value because they give more and more of their share of purchase to us versus other pharmacies, but also grocery stores, whatever we can find similar products. So that's the key, really.
Yeah, you really got to know your numbers in a kind of tight margin industry like that.
Yeah, and it's taken a lot of time, I think, to get the right amount of data, but also learn really the patterns. And we keep rediscovering things that we thought was true is not really true, and adapting. So it's never ending.
Yeah, I can imagine. So in 2020, we had obviously the COVID pandemic and lockdowns, and that must have been, what was that like for you as an online pharmacy? Yeah, kind of, you were at the intersection of both this massive shift to online that happened in a very short period of time, and also obviously everything related to pharmacy, healthcare, prescriptions, and just over-the-counter, medicines and supplements and so forth. So what was that like, those 2020, 2021, and 2022?
Yeah, that was interesting days for sure, and especially for us, we were already growing so fast. So it's not necessarily, as many think, only a blessing. It was in a way a blessing, especially long term, but also a lot of problem. And we had more to deal with in terms of demand that we could handle, and then all of a sudden that tripled overnight. And then maybe there was this hoarding, and then for a while people had what they had needed, and they stopped shopping, and so it was constant stop, start, and replenishing the warehouse, getting the people in. At one point, we interviewed, I think, 100 people, or hired even in a matter of weeks. Getting them to understand what to do. It was very costly, and short term we lost a lot of money on COVID, and we also lost a lot of money on COVID related products, because normally we get products within 24 hours. It's by law here, so we don't have a lot of inventory, not at least for months ahead. But all of a sudden we needed to make big buys, and also direct buys from Turkey, from China, very odd calls. And really the private players here ensured that Sweden had protection. It was us that did it, with great financial risk. It was not the government or even the government pharmacy. We took a lot of risk, and it was just a completely different business than the year before and today. So the good side is that we came on the radar screen also for older people, and everyone accepted and understood the value online plays in this industry, including at government and department level. We got access to a lot of people that didn't want to talk to us earlier, and they were basically, how can you help us? How can we help you? And we're in it together. So it was a very, very interesting period, and we were right in the middle of the storm for good and for bad.
Yeah, and I think you've been sharing some data that this the switch to online, there's been kind of a reversion in most categories, but not in pharmacy, because it makes so much sense to shop online because of selection and prices. Like no one goes to the no one looks forward to the pharmacy trip to walk around the aisles and do the shopping. So that COVID also exposed a lot of risks, geopolitical, supply chain risks. So is that something that you're paying attention to inside at Meds, and if so, how are you preparing or trying to mitigate those risks?
Yeah, it actually went surprisingly well, because the medicine industry is always prioritized in the value chains. And as far as I know, there weren't any major outages of medicine. There were some, but not for life-threatening things. I think for a while, some painkillers were out of stock, for example. But in general, it worked really well. And it's small packages. You can fly them, and you can prioritize them. What I think is more of a longer term issue is that medicines run out even today, and more than has always been the case, but it's continuing, and it's a global problem. And the pharmaceutical industry have very tight value chains, and in the 90s a lot of medicine was produced in Europe. Now it's all produced in China and India, and usually at a single factory in some cases. So if there's a fire there, then we're in trouble. So, and there's no storages along the way. So that's something I think for the politicians to think about. How can we create redundancy in this system and not be geopolitically dependent on China, for example, but also on a more micro level, dependent on one single manufacturer. And it's been so much focus on saving money, and that's great. I pay taxes too, and I appreciate that. But in the end, you can be smarter, and then you think, and actually create a lot of problems by being that tight. So that's something we can't really control, but we can communicate and make everyone aware of this issue. Typically, general consumer blames the pharmacy because they go to the pharmacy doesn't have the medicine, and it must be the pharmacy's fault. But it really isn't. There's no interest for us in not having things on stock. They're quite the opposite. So it's only because we cannot source it, and that's in other parts of the value chains to figure out.
Yeah, I think it opened the eyes of a lot of people to the fact that a lot of critical supplies material is produced in a single place, as you mentioned, in some cases, and that's probably not a very good idea. I want to go back to something you mentioned about growth. So you decided to stay in Sweden because it's a very huge market. It's been growing since the Middle Ages, like you said, so there's no reason to go abroad. But you also read in a recent article where you talked about, right now you're not focused on growth. There's no carrot, if you will, for growth. So I'd be interested to just hear about kind of your philosophy and how are you thinking about it? Like, when does it make sense to grow? When does it make sense to go into a new market? Like, how do you weigh these decisions in your head as someone who is focused on profitability and building a sustainable business, I would assume, but also someone who has raised capital, right, debt and equity from investors who presumably want to see growth. So how are you balancing and thinking about the growth question?
Yeah, there's a value to growth for us in that we need to become big enough to be relevant to suppliers, create a brand, etc. But it's not relevant to infinity if it doesn't also create value for investors. And I'm one of our investors too, so I want to see value. And if you look at some really, in my mind, successful companies that are listed and that create great results, but their share price goes down and already from quite a low level. In a market like that, we don't really see why should we invest in growing if it's not appreciated. And there's a time for everything. Long term, growing is the only way to create value. But right now, I think we reached a level where we don't have to grow for the sake of it, and then we can focus rather on making sure we have a very solid unit economics base. And then once the world becomes a little bit of a happier place than it is today, we can always resume growth, and we do grow still. It's not just 170% per year, because the market keeps growing and the switch from physical to online is continuing. So it's for up to us really to control where we want to go and where we create the most value for investors. So that's how we think.
Yeah, and you are, at least last year, and I'm presuming this year as well, you are growing faster than the market, so it's by no means...
Yeah, we did 30% last year, and I think the market was 10. So, and some media said, oh, they're collapsing or whatever, but I don't think 30% is really that. 3 times the market is that bad, actually. So
no, a lot of companies would be very happy with that.
Right.
But yeah, you raised, I think, over 50 million in both debt and equity from various investors. So I'd be interested to hear, are there any lessons you've learned about now being on the other side? You started on one side of the table, then now as an entrepreneur at the other side. Is there anything you've learned about the process? And maybe specifically, do you have any advice for e-commerce founders, entrepreneurs who are looking to raise either debt or equity in this kind of current economic environment?
Yeah, I talk with some of my peers that also have raised a lot of money, and we agree it's always been hard. So in media, it was like, oh, it was so easy, like taking candy from kids, and now it's hard, but it's always been hard and should be hard. So number one is embrace the pain. It's gonna be hard, and that's just reality. We don't have to raise money. It can also grow slower, and if you think raising money is the worst thing ever, either find someone else to do it, not externally, you need to do it internally and focus on something else, or build a smaller company, because then you won't have to raise money. So that's number one, is really, it's going to be hard, and if you're going to build something really big in a big industry, it probably will take several rounds. And then once you made that decision, is to find the pool where you get the fish, and don't fish in the wrong pond. And for us, VCs, traditional VCs, has not been the right pawn, for example. And I know that as a former VC myself. VCs want to see 10, 20x value creation in a short amount of time at huge risk. And that's typically done by expanding internationally really early, too early in most cases. But you need to really show that traction in many different markets, probably the big markets. And that wasn't really what we were building for and aiming for. So we have not focused on that type of investor. We rather started out with other tech entrepreneurs, and that's a great thing about Stockholm in many cases, in many countries now. But we have a lot of successful entrepreneurs that have created huge wealth, and sometimes they have more money than the VCs even. That wasn't the case back in 2001 when I started out as a VC, and we were the only show in town. So there is money there, and they do also understand. They have a longer view. They don't have a set, this needs to do this in 3 years, and then I need to exit in 4. As long as I think we follow a plan, and they're happy to stay along for the ride. So family office, tech entrepreneurs, that has worked really well for us. But to a point, then after a while you need to sort of switch. It doesn't work if you need to raise really large sums, and if you want to make acquisitions, enter new markets, then you need to start talking to other types of investors. And for us, we really saw the public market being a good place to be in that sense. When public markets were working, I don't really see them working now in terms of actually having a lot of liquidity and providing increased values compared to the private market. So constantly think 2 years ahead, where you're going to be, what type of investor do you need for that journey. And it's going to take at least 6 months to land around, and you should have at least a year and a half of runway, so you're not constantly out in the last minute. Start early. That's also very good for your personal health.
I can only imagine. I think that's really good practical advice there. It's been a pretty wild journey your last 5 years at 5-6 years at Meds. Is there anything that stands out in terms of particularly important lessons about entrepreneurship and company building that you've learned during those 5 years?
It's a hard question. I wish I learned more, I guess, but it's just keep learning. When you think you know something in a short amount of time, you're gonna find out that it's no longer true. So just keep adapting. That's the number one. And then also find not necessarily the people you need 3 years from now, but the people you need now. So you have to find someone that can really help you at your stage, because if you can get someone really, really senior, typically they haven't really been into the details for a long while, and all of a sudden they need to hire a team to do what you really wanted help with in the first place, and you could probably have hired those people instead. So in the end, it's all about the team and making sure everyone knows what they should focus on. And they can also you can work a lot, but if you run in the right direction, you're not getting anywhere. So it doesn't matter how fast you run. So getting the right team and making sure that they are very focused and incentivized on what you want to do. And that helps when you're on a mission like us to really create a challenger in a big industry. And it's easy to understand. And we see every day the value we create, customers that write to us or call us and say thank you because we helped them out in a tough situation. That helps in motivating people. It's not just another fintech. Nothing against fintechs, but I believe it's kind of harder for that type of company maybe to find a purpose.
Björn, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you and hear more about Meds. If people want to, you have a lot of good kind of thought leadership about the industry in general and stuff like that. What's the best way if people want to follow you? Is it LinkedIn?
LinkedIn is great. I think that's a magic tool. I've been in sales in the past, pre-LinkedIn, and it was a nightmare to figure out who am I going to talk to and how do I reach that person. So please connect there, and if I can help in any way, I try to take time, and I'd love to.
Like I said, thank you so much for coming on. We're gonna put your personal LinkedIn URL in the show notes if people want to check it out. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks a lot, Joshua. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. You can find all episodes of The Growth Pod on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts.